And some lieutenant commander, raised his hand and said, hey, what do we do about this suicide thing? I don't understand. And I was just twitching. And command master chief that was running it, she just looked at me. She said, Jim, what do you have? And I was like, okay, well, I said, we did this. And everybody stopped and they looked at me and I said, we did this. I said, if anybody in this room is over 50, like I am, I said, when we grew up, all the stuff that was happening on the street that we grew up in the doors of our neighbors was kept secret. It wasn't a tougher generation. It was a generation built on silence and fear and distrust, and you left everything alone and you didn't bother your neighbors.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Jim Ritch. He's a Command Master Chief of the U.S. Navy, retired, is a prominent military and civilian leader with a broad background in team building, leadership, and technical education, project management, process improvement, and networking. He has a passion for connecting people and public speaking. A native of Woodland, California, Jim transitioned from the Navy in 2019 after 30 years of service. He served his final 2 tours as a Command Master Chief. In his career, he served on 3 ships, 1 squadron, 1 special warfare unit, and 4 shore commands. Prior to retirement from naval service, he volunteered as the CMC of Foundry Class 011 and was an advisor for Foundry Class 012. Jim joined the Enlisted Leadership Program in 2019 and serves as the board vice president. Most recently, Jim completed the Resilience Building Leadership Program Trainer RBLPT certification and has relocated to Colorado Springs. He currently volunteers at the United States Air Force Academy and the Experiential Learning Department of the Center for Character and Leadership Development. Jim, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for taking David's recommendation.
Yeah, of course. And I know I just said a lot about you in your bio, but I'd love it if you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, your time served, and we'll just go from there.
Okay, well, so after 30 years in the Navy, I can say that over decades, things change over decades, right? So, when I came into the Navy in the early 90s, it was most definitely a different Navy than it is today. And I can remember getting divorced, in my first tour and talking to my chief, and my chief looked at me and squarely and said, your family didn't come in your sea bag. But he didn't say that like a jackass, right? He said it like, hey, that's the landscape of the Navy today. I understand, because he did, and he did some phenomenal things for me to assist me with what I was going through. And so by no means was he one of the, I wouldn't call him a bad chief, but he's one of the best chiefs I ever had. But he spoke real and he spoke truth to me. And again, that landscape was so different. And over time, as time passed and I progressed through the Navy, I saw things from the deck plates, from down there doing it up until, being a Command Master Chief. But I started out my naval career. By the time I got to my first ship, I had just got sober. And so I'm an alcoholic. I haven't had a drink in 31 years, I think, something like that. A long time.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's one day at a time. And I can remember showing up to that FFG, newly sober, new in the Navy, scared shitless, and the first port that we went to was the Philippines. And I got arrested while I was on shore patrol. Okay, so, when I start to tell that story, everybody stops and they just look at me like, wait a minute, you got arrested and you were shore patrol? And I'm like, yes, I did. And yes, I was. That's the coolest part of the story, is the title. All of the stuff that came as a result of that was my hard-headedness, my assertiveness in trying to do what my command told me to do, was to look out for our sailors. And I was trying to get some of our sailors out of trouble. And the local shore patrol that was stationed there wasn't having any of ET3 nonsense. So they tossed me in the in the back of the paddy wagon. I had to remind them, you guys might want to take this billy club from me. You don't want me to put me in here with a weapon. They're just like, shut up. And, and so my career started. And I became an early advocate for people from the start. And I don't know why, and I don't know how. It just sort of happened. I've been taught by so many people and had so many people mentor me and look out for me and teach me the ways of being sober, of living life, of being in the Navy and looking out for people. And I have sometimes I think it's a unique perspective based on my recovery from alcoholism, or my recovery, whatever you want to call it, and some of the people that I've been associated with, because I still use all those tools in helping people. And so I jumped into Spec War after that, and that was just a phenomenal tour and a great eye opener, and like, wow, this is a different part of the Navy. And when that tour was coming to an end, all E5 to E8 personnel that were rolling to shore duty had to go recruiting. Think about that for a second. It's like everybody knew it in the Navy. If you're calling, it's just like, and I can do a lot of things, but I can't recruit. I cannot.
What year was this?
95 to 98.
Okay. What
Yeah.
was happening at that time, I guess, that they needed so many
So
recruiters?
so you know how it's always cyclic, right? Something happens, and it's not just the Navy, it's the military in general, as I've learned by meeting other people in different services. If you look at some of the charts, right? So the Navy will sit out there and they'll go for 30 years on a rating and say, if these people are in a rating, for 30 years, we're going to need this many, this many, this many. And as you follow that graph down there, the slope, and then they've got each year group, as the year group pops above or below the line, they're trying to figure out, how are we going to get these people? And it's almost impossible to plan 15, 20 years in advance, but they do, right? And so when they come up with programs and they let people out of the Navy or separate them or do whatever, then all of a sudden they look up and they're like, oh God, we've got a shortage. We need to bring people in. And so they had some program, I don't remember what it was, and we were short and they needed people. And so they're like, we're rolling people E5 to E8. And actually it was 98. So all E5 to E8 rolling to shore duty. We're going to go recruiting. And I called my recruiter and I said, I can't do it, man. I can't. I put in 2 extensions. They denied them. I tried to go to DevGru. They denied that. And my recruiter, my detailer said, I will send you to Great Lakes based on the fact that you're an ET and we do need instructors. And I'm like, I'll go. I don't care. I'll go to Great Lakes right now. And when I went to Great Lakes, I thought I was going to be an instructor, because that's what they told me. And for a year, or actually 11 months and 2 weeks, they put me in the barracks. And that was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. When the barracks was at full capacity, there were 396 students. And I learned how to deal with junior sailors. I was an E6 at the time. I learned how to deal with junior sailors, but because I had to. I would have drowned if I didn't. And they needed somebody. And so I'm going to jump forward real quick and tell a story. So as a command master chief in my last command, I'm sitting in line at the bar. It's like, wait a minute, didn't you say you're sober? And it's like, yes, I was getting a drink for somebody. I don't, it's not going to get me by osmosis after, this long. So I'm getting a drink for somebody. And this guy's behind me. And he's, I don't know, 6 foot something, almost 300 pounds, big bearded face. And he looks at me and he says, hey, do you remember me? And no, I don't remember you at all. I'm sorry. And he goes, I was one of your students in Great Lakes. And I was like, oh. And he goes, I owe everything to you. And I said, that's a bit much. Like, what do you mean you owe everything to me? And he goes, well, I came back one night, and I was like, oh shit. And he's like, I came back one night and I was drunk and I was underage. And you happened to be on duty in the barracks that you worked in. And I said, okay. And I'm like, what did I do? And he goes, well, you pulled me into the office, you chewed my ass, you told me to get upstairs to my room, don't come out unless I have to go to the bathroom. And when I come out in the morning for muster, I better be sober. And he goes, so I did. And I served, I don't know, 10, 12 years, whatever it was. And he would use that as an example as he led his sailors. And then he ended up as an ISCA, an in-service engineering agent. And so that's a person who is in charge of a certain system in the Navy. So, you were an AT, so a certain system that you had on a plane, there's an ISCA for that, right? So every system that's on every plane belongs to that. So he ends up in that job. And so what he said was, if I would have sent him to mast, written him up and he had gone to mast, he'd have gone straight out to the fleet. He wouldn't have been an ET. He wouldn't have ended up in that job. I still think that's high praise and giving me a little bit too much credit. But I looked at it at the time, and I don't know, some people might argue and say I did the wrong thing. I don't think I did. I was underage before. I drank underage before. I did some things before. And I look at those as situational. And in that period of time, in that year, that 11 months and 2 weeks, I learned so much about dealing with sailors. One of them was out hanging out on the smoking area because that's where everything happens, right? And he looked at me and he says, you're the only E2 on this base running around in an E6 uniform. And I'm like, what? I don't understand. What did you just say to me? And he's like, no, it's a compliment. We love you. You don't treat us differently because we're students. You don't treat us differently because you outrank us. We understand that you're first class and we're not, and we're students, but you treat us like human beings. And I'm like, well, you are. And so I took that with me, made chief on the way out, went to my next command, went to a ship, started chiefing, started looking at all of a sudden, all of the things that are expected of a chief, what people want from a chief. Like, people look at the chief and they're like, do you have all the answers? And it's like, I don't have all the answers. I know a lot of people that have a lot of the answers and I can get you to them. And I might have a couple myself, but I did everything that I could to connect whoever with whoever for whatever. And I learned that deeply in recovery. As my sponsor, I would come to my sponsor with some issue that I thought was, world ending. He'd just kind of chuckle and look at me and say, I have no experience with that, James, because he would call me James when he wanted to be serious. And then he would point over to a table at a meeting and there'd be like 3 or 4 or 5 people there. And he'd say, those 2 guys right there and that lady over there, they have great experience with that. And I suggest if you want to address that, go talk to one of them. And I always think that it's very humble of somebody to pass off somebody to somebody who's more qualified. I used to tell my sailors, I don't put a mark on the wall. I don't put a notch in my belt. I don't keep track of who I help. I just help. And I've got these 4 things on fixing. Maybe they'll come up later, but one of the things is some things are better fixed by others. And I would tell them, I don't care who you talk to. I care that you talk to somebody. Now, when it's like an E2 or an E3 coming in, checking in, it's their first command. I tell them, I don't want you going to talk to another E2 or an E3 because they don't have any experience and they don't know where you need to go. I need you to talk to, at least a work center supervisor or an LPO, somebody who's got some experience. But if you're an extremist, I don't give a shit who you grab by the sleeve. Don't walk out of this door and get in your car and take those problems home with you. And I just carried that forward as I went on from progression to progression to progression. And at the end of my career, less than a year left before I retire, I called David Deary because I had met him through a circumstance that wasn't necessarily fortunate. I have a big mouth and fast fingers on a keyboard, and I sent an email to some people that I probably shouldn't have sent it to without informing other people. Oh, I don't know, like the MCPON and an admiral, and didn't tell anybody else. And David was one of the people I had to apologize to. So we became friends, and later I called him and I said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about retirement, and I'd like to talk to you about where you work, because I wanted to work. One of the places I wanted to work was where he worked. And so he told me about what retirement was like, and he told me about what his company was like. And then he said, hey, I need a favor. And I'm like, what do you need? And he goes, we had our class CMC for the foundry backed out. They had something come up class is 3 weeks away and we need a CMC. Are you interested? And I'm like, sure. What is it? You know, and my CO loved leadership. He's a phenomenal guy. And so I went to him and I said, hey, this opportunity, they need me. It's a week long. He says, great. I'm looking at the schedule and I'm like, oh, it's on the Midway. I work on North Island. I'll just pop in, pop out. I had no idea that I was entrenched with them and I would spend the night on the Midway and I was gone for a week. And had I known that, I probably wouldn't have volunteered and I would have lost out on a life-changing experience, because as I was getting out of the Navy, I was exposed to all of these leaders from different walks of life, some with some military ties, some with none whatsoever, and a different perspective. And one of the common themes that almost every one of them, I could probably say every one of them has, but I'm not a fan of absolutes, is that people connectivity and the wellness of people. And if you want to just call it what it is, the mental health and the mental well-being of people, whether they be sailors or airmen or soldiers or, Billy at the supermarket. And I retired and I got a job and then I left that job because it didn't suit me well. And now I sit here and I volunteer and I'm taking workshops with a bunch of the professors at the academy and some stuff through different veterans organizations locally. And I want to get into some sort of mental health service, specifically veteran oriented, if I can, period. How's
Love
that?
it. Love it. Yeah, so I'll get into here in a second a little bit more about the Enlisted Leadership Foundation and what it is. But a couple of things that I wanted to touch on in your story that really stood out to me. The first one is when you talked about that sailor who was drinking underage. I really wanted to reiterate this because I think that there's this, I don't want to say disconnect, but I'm not sure what other word to use. So I'm going to use the word disconnect between the old school Navy mentality and the newer school Navy mentality. And a lot of people think, or, say, I guess, that there's people getting soft and they don't know how to treat people anymore. And when I joined the military, what I experienced was, leaders that were afraid to be more stern with people because they didn't want to get in trouble. And so they were experiencing, directly firsthand saw this disconnect. But what I love about how you handled the situation, and I will say for myself, there was a chief of mine when I was in A school that I had so much respect for because he knew when to turn on and off that stern military side of him. And this is, I guess, how I picture you handling the situation as well, because you, from your story, sound like the kind of person that would be that good leader and be there for people on a personable level when needed. But when you needed to be more stern or chew someone's ass or, whatever is needed in that situation, you did that. But you didn't take it so far that you were like, you're a piece of shit. You need to get out of the Navy. I don't want you in my Navy. And I think that there's so many lessons to be learned from this for these leaders that are maybe listening and they're like, hey, I don't really know how to handle these situations because I still, feel like this person needs their ass chewed because they're doing something in the wrong. But maybe I don't think that they need to go all the way up to mast. And I see this in Facebook groups that I'm in too. I'm in several military related Facebook groups where leaders will come in and they'll ask for advice. They'll be like, hey, this sailor's doing this. I don't know what to do. But I think that there's a lot to be learned in that because you gave such a great example of his life after, who he became and who he felt that he became as a direct result of that interaction and what could have potentially happened had that situation been handled any differently. So I really appreciate you sharing that story specifically. Also, going back to the beginning of your story, I want to know more about what happened with you getting arrested because you kind of left us on a cliffhanger there.
Honestly, I'm telling you, it's the the title is the coolest part, right? But so I show up on the ship, I meet the ship in Bahrain. I had one of the finest groups of sailors in my division who took me under their wing and were as brutal and as loving as you could want from a group of guys. There were four of them, and they made me the technician that I am. They shaped the sailor that I am. And so we were heading to the Philippines, and so many people haven't been to the Philippines, and the Philippines had a crazy reputation. So let's see, Thailand has a reputation. Thailand is in one of those little seats, like when you go to parent teacher conference, right? And you're sitting in the little desk, right? That's Thailand.
Yeah.
So the Philippines was, it was crazy. And I was coming home. I was going to ask my fiance, I was going to ask my girlfriend to marry me, right? And so anyway, so we pull into the Philippines, and just the Liberty briefs were so different. I'm not even going to get into it but this was all male ships. It is about as sexist as it could possibly be.
This is the 90s, right?
Yeah, the
Okay, so
slideshows
yeah,
that they
yeah.
showed.
We have an idea. I mean, those of us that, remember the 90s. I was a child in the 90s, but I still
Yeah.
remember the culture. I mean, we've come such a long way. So,
So
addressing the elephant in the room, yes, I can imagine just how sexist it was on the ship, and all males and pulling into a port.
not
Those
just
of
any
us
port,
Navy, we know what happens when
yeah.
ships pull into port, and I'm sure it's even worse with an all male ship. So,
And it was what
yep.
they told me. They're like, Jim, it's like adult Disneyland. I'm like, I'm getting married when I get home. I don't want to go to Disneyland. Right? It's just, and so they're like, okay, shore patrol, right? So the Philippines was we were the second to the last battle group to pull into the Philippines before they turned everything back over. And they were extremely serious about these 4-man hit squads from the Northern Filipino Army targeting, sailors. And so everybody was on the buddy system, and it was so strict that they're like, look, if you get companionship for the night, your buddy better be in the room with you, or or waiting outside the door. I mean, I'm serious, right? They're telling us this at the Liberty Brief. And so, I've been on board for like 2 months, and I'm listening to everything they say,
You're
right?
like, what the hell did I get myself into?
Absolutely. So, so I'm walking around. I'm an E4, right? And I've got this E5 with me, and he was from the Virgin Islands, and he was just the happiest go lucky guy. I mean, this guy, I loved him dearly. He was just phenomenal. And his outlook on life. So we're walking around, and we're going into the bars, doing what shore patrol is supposed to be doing. And the next thing I know, one of my guys is standing on the curb, and he's just got this look of panic on his face. And so I go up and I said, hey, what's going on? And he's like, so and so and so and so are over there getting arrested. They got in an argument with a mama-san. And I'm like, God. So I go across the street, and there's these two ginormous beasts of men. They're E6s. I swear they could be like defensive linemen. They were just huge guys. And I walked over to where all of my people, the E4 and the E5s, were, right? And I said, hey, what's going on? And they're like, we're not real sure. And I said, well, if you're not real sure what's going on, if you turn them over to me, I'll escort them back to the ship, and I guarantee you they won't come back out tonight, and they won't be a problem. And they're like, we'll go talk to the first class, right? So I go over to Monster One, right? And I'm just like, hey, blah, 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 and he's like, show up to go on about your business. And I was just like, whoosh. I'm like, okay, right? And so I start to walk away, and here comes this seaman running down the street, and he's like, oh my God, they're my buddies. I'm gonna go to mast if they get arrested and I'm not with them. And I was like, oh man. So I tap on the guy's window that just told me to go on about my business. I give him the like roll your window down sign. And he opens the door and starts to stand up. And the next thing I know, I've got a hand on my shoulder, and it's monster number 2 flipping me around. He just kind of spun me around in an about face, snaps his finger in front of me, and he's like, give me a mother effing ID card. And I'm just like, here you go. And the next thing I know, I got both monster number 1 and monster number 2 sitting there just reading me the riot act. They got me up against the paddy wagon, and they're writing me up. And he was shore patrol, right? So so SH2 is sitting there, and he's just like, oh man. And I'm just like, what? And they're like, shut the, next thing you know, and they want to put me in the back of the paddy wagon. And again, I told them, I said, I still have this baton, right? So I give that to Witter because they didn't have enough supplies for both of us to have one. So I tell this guy, I'm like, meet me at the jail. He's like, got it, because that's where we mustered. And so they drive us to the jail. And so my two guys from the ship are in the paddy wagon with me. So we go into the drunk tank, and it's like this sunken octagon. And so I'm sitting in between them. One's an E2 and the other one's an E3. I'm the E4, and there's some kid from the Lincoln who's in the fetal position throwing up on himself in the middle of the floor. It's the four of us in a drunk tank. So I stand up and I grab this kid who's throwing up on himself, and I pull him out of his own throw up. And the guy that's running the drunk tank starts screaming at me, read the signs, there's no movement. And I'm like, he's getting sick. Like, like I'm not gonna, what do you, I still am taking care of people then, right? So anyway, I'm sitting on the bench in between these two guys that are on the ship, and one of them is crying. And he's just like, oh my God, we're gonna get this, we're gonna get that, we're gonna get this. And the other one is the bosun mate, right? And he turns and he looks at him and he's like, shut the F up. He said, quit being a little bitch. He said, look at this dumb mother who's sitting in between us. He's shore patrol and he's brand new and he's going to get his ass handed to him. And he's not crying. And in my head, I'm like, I'm crying on the inside, bro. Like I'm screwed, right? I am not going to be able to get married. I'm arrested and I've been on the ship. I'm on duty. I'm shore patrol. I'm done. Luckily, so I get back to the ship that night, and OS1 brought me back. And my department head was the CDO for the night. And I'm standing right outside of his stateroom, and he's talking to OS1. And he's like, what the hell is up with Ritch? And he goes, sir, because on the form that they filled out, alcohol on breath is on there. And they didn't cross it off. And they're like, he's got alcohol in his breath. And when I showed up to the ship and I met everybody, when I did my check-in with the COXO department head, I said, look, I have been sober for like 2.5 months or 3 months or whatever the truth was at the time. I said, I want to start AA meetings on the ship. So they knew I was sober. So he's like, what is this, Ritch? And I flipped out. I'm like, wake up, doc, get him up now. Somebody give me a sobriety test. I don't care, and they're like, calm down. And the next day at officer's call, the CO was going through the sheets and he saw my name and he saw on the form and he said, MA1, you go find out who filed the false government report on Ritch, because I know this isn't true. I know he's sober, because he asked around and some of the guys are like, no, we saw him walking around doing his rounds. He was doing his job. So luckily, because I met everybody and it told them who I was and was vulnerable, because that was a big step for a brand new, guy on a ship. And now I didn't stand shore patrol for the next like 2.5 years, which wasn't a bad thing. But that's my got arrested on shore patrol in the Philippines story.
Now, I love how transparent you were with your command when you first showed up. And I think that, do I think that every leader in the military takes care of their people like your people took care of you because you were transparent? No, I don't. But I think that there's a lot to be learned from that. And that, sometimes being transparent with people and just saying like, hey, listen, this is where I'm at right now. I would like support, really could help you out in the long run. Gauge it on your person, but no, that's a really cool story. I'm glad you shared that. I found it entertaining. So yeah, I'd love to talk about the Enlisted Leadership Foundation though, and everything that entails. Could you just tell us what the Enlisted Leadership Foundation is and how it came about?
So first thing I would say is go to the Enlisted Leadership Foundation website, and because I probably won't do it justice and I'll miss some of the things, but long ago, when David Deary was Southwest Region Master Chief, I believe that's what it was, the Navy had stopped its leadership brick and mortar training. Right. So
so just to interrupt you for a second, they used to teach leadership brick and mortar.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
When was this?
Back in the 90s
and
prior.
And then do we know why they stopped? Okay. Anyway, continue.
So cost effective, right? So a lot of things come down to funding, right? So funding when you're in the military, and then profit margin when you're out in the private sector, right? So people don't like it sometimes when other people say, money is the bottom line, but money is the bottom line. So yeah, we used to have leadership schools, and you'd have CPO leadership, you'd have first class leadership, second class leadership, and you would go to the schoolhouse. I believe it was a week. Chiefs training might have been 2 weeks. You had to have that before you could get selected for chief petty officer. So not only did you get initiated, but you had leadership. And so you'd go in with a small group, I don't know, 16, 20, whatever it was, and you'd go through these leadership classes. And the Navy, in their infinite wisdom, stopped doing that. And as you know now, they're starting doing it again. And it takes a long time. So I go back to that graph that I talked about for Manning for 30 years, right? So it takes a while to start a program. It takes a while, not as long, to stop a program. And when you realize, or when it is realized, that there was a mistake made, it takes a long time to get the funding to start something back up. So what the Navy did was they put the training in the hands of the commands. And they would say, petty officer leadership, PO1, PO2, PO3 leadership is going to get taught. And it was supposed to be taught by chiefs. Did you go to it? When you were
Was it the NDOC? Is that what we're talking about, or are we
Yeah,
talking
well,
about something different?
so when you were you a push button?
No, I wasn't.
Okay, so when you put on petty officer, when you put on AT3, you had to do a petty officer INDOC and petty officer leadership class,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Who taught it?
I want to say it was E6s for my third class and my second class in
Yeah.
doc.
So that was supposed to be chiefs, right? Chiefs were supposed to do that. And so what happens, right? Here comes the program, it starts, everybody's out there, they're doing it, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm busy. I've got a shit hot petty officer first class who can head this up. Boom. Now first classes are running it. The next thing you know, second classes are running it. And the program gets diluted, and it goes from 3 days to 3 hours or whatever it happens to be. And over the course of time, from the time that it started or till the time that it stopped, the quality diminished. At some point in that time, David realized that there was a need to bring some leadership training in. So he started the Foundry. And so the Foundry started in San Diego, and it used to be on the Midway. So we bring 60 sailors, E6s, mostly Navy. Well, back in the beginning, it was always Navy. And then mentors, E7 and above, or E7 to E9. And well, actually it was chiefs and senior chiefs. So E7s and E8s. And then there was a master chief, a CMC running the class. And they would go from the Midway in the morning to some facility that had an auditorium, and they would try and economize their travel. So let's go to this facility and we'll bring in a speaker, and then bring in another speaker, and then have lunch, maybe go to another facility, tour that, so on and so forth. And so over time, David built an inventory. There we go. An inventory of speakers, from different walks of life. And they had different topics. And sometimes we would go to the Red Cross and they would tour us in their operations center, or we would go to not 411, but 211, and then, they've got an auditorium and we bring a speaker in, and all of these E6s and the mentors would get exposed to these different leadership ideas. Some of them, like I said, had military ties or military backgrounds. Some had none whatsoever. And they would listen to the stories from the speakers and how they adapted their leadership principles to the things that they had. Now, a negative person would sit there and say, well, I'm not getting anything from this executive at so-and-so. This isn't going to help me here. And it's like, hold on there a second, champ, sit down for a second and listen. If you just, advance that or retard that, like you're setting a car timing or timing on, just a couple of degrees from top dead center, and you can apply that principle to what you're doing. And over time, we got more speakers, and I don't want to say better speakers, but they were able to refine what they did. And today we have some Oh man, we have some phenomenal speakers. So the Foundry will run 4.5 days. Actually, so it starts Sunday, we do introductions. Monday, we jump right in, 4 speakers, 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening. We do that Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, we have one last speaker before graduation because it's virtual. Things were a little different when they were face to face. So every now and then, David and I help him with the schedule. I used to run the schedule. Now he's running the schedule. I'm doing some of the behind the scenes stuff, frees up some of his time because that guy he's like the Energizer Bunny and like a pack mule at the same time, right? He's just loaded down, but he's just charging forward. That guy, he does a lot. He's a phenomenal guy. And so we get these speakers in there and we're doing the schedule and we're trying to figure out, and some of these people are CEOs and we've had former senators, we've had, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, we've got former police officers, current police officers, and it just, you name it, we've got it. They're speaking to everybody. And when we start the class off now, we've brought in, so you're talking about transparency, or you mentioned transparency. And another thing is adaptability, I think, right? So a couple of the mentors that we had reached back out to us and said, hey, we'd like to volunteer. We'd like to help. And oh, by the way, here's some feedback on how we thought the mentor process would have been better. And it's like, awesome. You two are in charge of that. And they're making, that's Michael Phillips and Marga Gabriel. They're making our life like super easy, and they're making the class better just as well, right? So it's all a team effort. So now what we do is in advance, we reach out to the students and we reach out to the mentors and we break them into their small groups and we get them to establish rapport early. And then we give them a couple of podcasts to listen to, or TED Talks. And like, I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. Just, you talk about vulnerability, you talk about shame, you talk about emotion. So I haven't watched the Brene Brown vulnerability TED Talk. It's got like, I don't know, over 20 million views by now. I haven't watched a benefit of failure thing. And the theme and the foundation that we are laying for them is in their small group. They need to establish that rapport and establish that transparency and establish the understanding that there is going to be vulnerability, so that when the class starts and the flood comes, because the class will start and the flood will come, I promise you this, in the very first speaker, the flood will come and it will continue until graduation. The thing is like, if you thought about being arm in arm across a channel, right? If I'm sitting there near the bank of the channel, maybe the floodwater isn't affecting me as much, but maybe you're in the middle of that chain and that floodwater is super affecting you, right? And then the chain kind of moves over to the side and the next speaker, you're over on the shore side or whatever. And at first the mentors and the students look at us, or they get back to us and they're like, man, you guys are being a little pressy here. And it's like, no, hang on. We promise you things will happen. And David and I can tell you the way, basically, that a day is going to go by the speakers that we have. And we have been, I don't want to say accused, but we have been told that we set days up, and we don't. I will tell you that one day I scheduled 3 people who had really powerful stories in the same day, and our class size was over 100. And you never know what somebody is going to say that's going to trigger something in somebody. And one of the benefits that we get from the virtual class is the chat. So I'm sitting over here pointing at the chat, right? Because on Zoom. And what happens is the students are just blowing chat up, right? And you can't have that in a face-to-face classroom, because that would just be chatter and it would be chaos and you wouldn't be able to hear the speaker. So I'm always trying to figure out how we can meld the two of those things and have like a hybrid, because the stuff that's generated from the chat, if you have 100 people sitting in a room, 3 people are going to raise their hand and a bunch of people are going to be silent. They're going to be rolling their eyes, and like, my dogs are running around back here. You've got dogs and a kid running around. And in Zoom, when we welcome in the Foundry, we welcome your dog in your lap. We welcome your kid in your arms. We welcome all this. And our facilitators or our speakers do the same because they're human just like us. And so David was building a schedule out one time, and he was talking about where he wanted to place people and how he wanted to get there. And we have this psychologist that speaks in our group for the Foundry, and her name's Dr. Shiva Guide. And she's done so much with active duty and veterans in the San Diego area. And I told him, I said, I think she's the most important speaker that we have. Whether she's the best speaker that we have or she's not the best speaker that we have is irrelevant. That's a subjective thing based on how the students and the mentors pick that up. But the topic that she covers is the most important thing, in my opinion. And again, like she sits there and she doesn't even want somebody. She would rather just say, hey, this is Dr. G, because that's what people call her. And that's it. Don't even read a bio. We've got an hour and a half. Go. Let's talk. And she doesn't even, she asked me one time, in an email prior to the class, she says, hey, Jim, what do you want me to talk about? And I said, that's like asking the wind which way I want it to blow. I said, just go be you. And so now she doesn't even, she just wants to be introduced. And in that heavy day that we had back, the one I was talking about, we just had some students that had some very similar situations to what was happening with the speakers or the speakers in their stories, whether it be how they came up, because some people have upbringings that are, they're enough to make you wipe your brow and wipe a tear and so on and so forth. And then at night, from Monday through Thursday, we have fireside chats, right? So after the day of the Foundry class, the students get into their small groups and we put them in breakout rooms. And even in a Zoom with 100 people, let's just say, you're still going to get 15 or 20. But now those 80 that aren't talking are tending to talk because we built that foundation and they have that rapport and they understand that they can be vulnerable in that small group. And it doesn't matter whether it's a media icon or somebody who runs an energy corporation or the CEO of Scripps Hospital, who happens to be one of our sponsors, telling their story. And something happened at some point during the class, during one speaker, to so many people. And then the outpouring is just crazy. It's ridiculous. The benefit that happens. And you get back to the people that are sitting there like, I had no idea what this was going to be. And I had no idea the effect that it was going to have on me. And now I'm going to take this back, because now I know things different than I knew before, that I didn't know before. And I'm going to take that back and I'm just going to try it in my division or my work center or, and now we've opened it up. We've had Air Force Chief Master Sergeants as our senior enlisted leader. We've had Army, we've had Space Force. I think we've had Coast Guard, but we've had all the services in. Let's just say we've had all the services in some capacity, whether they be students or mentors or the senior enlisted leader. And so we run 2 to 3 classes a year for the Foundry, just depending on how our schedule goes. And we thought we were going to try and go back face-to-face on the midway, but if we go face-to-face on the midway, we lose the ability to have those people from out of state come in. And I'm not sure that we'll go back. We do have, we've done some hybrid sort of stuff, like we'll get a facility where we can bring in like local people in San Diego, or, maybe we get a bunch from San Antonio or a bunch from Whidbey, fleet concentration areas or what have you. And we'll put them in an area. So maybe now there's 8 watching one Zoom, and they can still sit there and chat on their phone, but they have that face-to-face camaraderie between, that small group. And they're probably not all in the same small group when they have their fireside chats. So I went down the rabbit hole.
No, you're good. You give such great information. And I think what you guys are doing with this Enlisted Leadership Foundation is so incredibly powerful. And it's funny because I talked about, oh goodness, a few months back, I don't remember if I said it on the podcast or if it was just a conversation I had, but I was talking about how there's so much leadership information out there between books and podcasts and, what have you, that the military really isn't tapping into. And for hailing itself as one of the epitome organizations of leadership, the military should be teaching these things to its people. And so I love that you guys are bringing in CEOs of other companies, people outside of the military to give that different perspective. Because I think even in my own personal development journey, I didn't learn the leadership principles that I know today from being in the military. I learned a lot in the military, don't get me wrong. Like, I think that the person that I am today, a lot of that has to do with my time served and, me learning to really stand up for myself and the people around me. But when we're talking leadership specific principles, those are things that I did on my own, but not everyone knows where to look. And so when you talk about people saying, oh, I didn't know this, and now I'm going to take this back, that's so powerful. Because I just imagine if more people in the military had these tools to be better leaders, it's truly transformative. And so I think that it's absolutely amazing what you guys are doing. The first time that I heard there was an Enlisted Leadership Foundation, I was thoroughly impressed. I was like, I have to dig more into this. I have to talk to someone from this organization because I talk about this so much, and it's truly, it's an amazing thing. So I'm so incredibly appreciative of what you guys are doing, and I hope that more people take advantage. How would someone go about if they wanted to do one of these classes with you guys? How would someone go about being a part of this?
Well, first off, there's also the Foundry is just for E6s, right? So any service E6. We also have the LPO Academy, and I believe we're looking at renaming that because as we've, like when it was face to face and it was San Diego centric, it was really Navy centric, right? And so, the other services are like, what the hell is an LPO? But we have an E5 Academy, and our E5 Academy is taught by our graduates from the Foundry. So they even get some of the same speakers that the Foundry gets, but those speakers are so awesome and they understand that this is a different level, and they bring that in. But if you go to the Enlisted Leadership Foundation website, if you just type in Enlisted Leadership Foundation, you can get the schedules. So we just had, what day is this? Wednesday? Thursday? Yeah. So last week, we graduated class 36V from the LPO, or I was going to say the LPO Academy. And that was our last class for the year, right? So we don't have the schedule out for next year, but that's coming soon. You can go onto our website. You can sign up for the newsletter. David sends out a weekly newsletter, and in that, or you could go to the Enlisted Leadership Foundation Facebook page, and that information is there as well. But your story doesn't end here, right? This is what you're talking about, and this is what you mean. And I want to talk about for a second, at my last command that I served at NAVCOM Telstay, it was a shore command, and we had a number of LIMDU personnel, LIMDU and pregnancies, right? So at one point, we had almost 10% of the LIMDU people that were farmed out from Balboa back to the commands. I know there's some other commands in the area that had a great number too, but I believe you mentioned this on one of your other episodes about the silent, disease, if you will. If I see somebody walking with a leg in a cast, or an arm in a sling, or even somebody who's pregnant, I can tell what's going on, but I cannot tell what's going on with somebody who has some issue. They would come to us. I would check them in. I would sometimes know why they're here or why they came, and sometimes I wouldn't. But by their code, I could tell that they were PCS or they were not. And if they're not PCS and I couldn't see something, and I'd say, look, you can tell me about what's going on, or you can not tell me about what's going on. I'm just here to support you, And so many of them would leave a command and be told that they were faking it. They were, not chastised. They were hammered. Like, you're leaving us shorthanded. You're full of shit. You're not this. You're not that. And I'm not in a position, or I wasn't in a position, sitting behind my desk to sit there and judge you, whoever you happen to be who came in. I'm here to support you. I'm here to get you the help that you need to get, or ensure that you are continuing on the treatment plan that you're on, so we can either get you back out to the fleet if that's what's supposed to happen, or we can medically separate, whatever it is. If I'm sitting there in a position of judgment, so you talked briefly about, that old guard and sitting there, and there's some people that just don't want to admit what's happening. I sat in a commander's conference one time, and so this is senior enlisted leaders, COs, XOs, directors, blah, blah. And some lieutenant commander, raised his hand and said, hey, what do we do about this suicide thing? I don't understand. And I was just twitching. And command master chief that was running it, she just looked at me. She said, Jim, what do you have? And I was like, okay, well, I said, we did this. And everybody stopped and they looked at me and I said, we did this. I said, if anybody in this room is over 50, like I am, and at that point, the 1-star and the 2-star admirals must have been the only ones that were 50 because they turned and looked at me. I said, when we grew up, all the stuff that was happening on the street that we grew up in and the doors of our neighbors was kept secret. It wasn't a tougher generation. It was a generation built on silence and fear and distrust, and you left everything alone and you didn't bother your neighbors. You didn't get in their business, and people drank, people committed suicide, people did all sorts of stuff. Bad things happened before there was social media, for a long time. And what happened in the Navy, in DOD, and is that at some point, I don't want to say people got enlightened, but some enlightened people with a voice said, hey, let's do this. And some people got on board. And so what we said as leaders, because I'll put myself in there, is please tell us your story. Please, it's safe. Tell us your story. And all of a sudden, the floodgates open and all of these stories came out, and we didn't have and still do not have the infrastructure to take care of this. And we can't put the genie back in the bottle. I can't stop that water from flowing, but it's flowing. So I would get a sailor who was in extremis, and I would have them sitting in my office, and they were just, as you would imagine, shaking, quivering, crying, whatever. They were in a bad spot. And I'm on the phone with Fleet and Family Services. I'm on the phone with, the local military treatment facility, and I'm trying to get them help. And they're like, we can't see them for 28 days. And I'm looking at my clock and it's 10 o'clock and it's the first of the month. And I'm like, it's 10 o'clock. What's going to happen at 10 o'clock on the second of the month when they have 27 days left? Like, this is bullshit, right? Sorry, I'm getting on a roll here. And so they tell me, well, you can send them to the emergency room. And I'm like, okay, I understand that's a stopgap, right? And so when I would get in, and I'm not the only one by any means, I am no champion. I'm just one person, and I have a similar voice to some people, and some people don't seem to have that voice. And we would talk about that. And there's just a shortage of mental health professionals that are out there. And so civilian and military. And so when we, whoever we happen to be, can educate people, like I talk about, Sheila, Dr. G, and talk about Brene Brown, and there are so many people out there. And so you have a very small daughter that you were holding earlier. If you, as a mother, teach her as a child, as a little girl, or if you have a son, whatever, you teach your children how to identify these things and how to process them, because nobody taught us that. That wasn't out there back then, right? And there is science-based information on this stuff. It works. If we equip and educate our children or our youth or our junior sailors or our junior military members and our senior military members on how to process this stuff, that will stem the tide a bit until we learn how to do this. The thing is, people don't want to look at that. They want to hide from it. They want to say, you're soft. I've been to a few things here lately taught by PhDs, and they sit there. So now I'm in Colorado, and they're like, look, this isn't woo-woo. This isn't granola and yoga pants and man buns. There's science behind this. But yet they make that disclaimer because not anybody, a lot of people are out there that are like, this is just some hooey, gooey bullshit, and we don't need it. You just need to toughen up. And it's like, no, I don't need to toughen up. If I lost somebody in my life somehow, let's just say suicide, right? If I know somebody, whether I was close or not, and it affected me, or if somebody committed suicide at a command, because that rocks a command like nobody's business. And I happen to have suicide in my life from a family member or somebody close, that could trigger me, right? And somebody would sit there and say, one of the old guard, so to speak, oh my God, just what? Like, move on. We got a mission to do. And it's like, we do have a mission to do, and we do need to move on. But I need to process this. I need some time to process this. And that has to be put into place. So
No, I agree. I wish that more people like you were out there. And I know there are people like you out there. I've met a few really good people in my time served. I've met a handful of really good people outside of the military that are really working on the forefront to try to bring these things to light. And you're absolutely right when you talk about equipping people. I'm such a huge advocate for preventative measures instead of reacting. How can we be proactive? How can we give people the tools so that they understand? I mean, the military is quite literally a cocktail for mental health issues. We take people out of their hometown. We put them in a stressful situation right off the bat, i.e. boot camp, A school. We're around people that we've never been around before. Some of these people have never left their small hometowns, and they're seeing diversity for the first time in their life. Everyone's bringing their own cultures, backgrounds, experiences. You got people who quite literally don't know how to be leaders on one hand. You got other people who know how to be leaders on the other hand. I mean, and then you mix it with deployments and long work schedules and watch standing. I mean, everything that the military is a cocktail for mental health challenges. So why are we not equipping these sailors, soldiers, Marines with the tools to be able to handle that? And I did hear a few days ago that apparently in boot camp, they're starting to teach people stress reduction or like techniques to handle stress. I need to verify that to see if that's actually happening.
So if you look on John McCaskill's Men Talking Mindfulness podcast, he has an interview with a retired Command Master Chief Stephen Drum, or retired Master Chief. I'm not sure if he's Command Master Chief. Retired Master Chief Stephen Drum. He was a SEAL. He was stationed up in Great Lakes, and they took him, a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, and a chaplain, and they developed the Navy Warrior Resiliency Program. I could have it backwards or mishmashed. And so he's sitting there talking like, I'm a SEAL. Like, you're putting me in here with a chaplain and a therapist, and we're going to come up with this warrior toughness. What? And I encourage you to listen to that podcast. I encourage you to reach out to Master Chief Drum. I don't know what his information is, but I'm sure it's on that podcast, or you can reach out to John and get it, because I think he would be a phenomenal guest for you. Because what happens is sometimes we, the older people, get exposed to something and we're like, oh my Lord, look at this, here it is now, right? And so then we try and scramble and throw it backwards to the more junior people so that they can get it, right? And they can grow it and become better. Because I mean, ships still have to deploy and missions still have to happen and things still have to get done, and manning is awful, and op tempo is awful, and it's hard.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
but it's easier when I can reach out to you. It's easier when you can tell me your story and you know that I'm listening. When I was getting ready to retire, I reached out to a fleet master chief who had just retired, and he asked me, he said, hey, are you taking care of your mental health issues? And I'm like, what mental health issues? And he's like, you have them. Trust me. He says, I didn't think I had them either. And fast forward to I'm in retirement and I'm dealing with an issue. And because I've been taught, go to somebody who knows, I reached out to one of my former sailors. She separated after her second tour. And I was talking to her, and I was telling her about my anxiety and depression and, PTSD. And she said, yeah, we knew. I said, who knew? And she said, we did, your sailors. I said, you guys knew? And she goes, oh, we knew you had your little quirks, you had your things. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me? And she goes, because we were too busy coming to you with ours. And that like warmed my heart, and it made me think, like, I thought I was fine. I thought I could sit there and listen to all your stuff all day long, doing all the things. And since it wasn't mine, I wouldn't take some of that on, but apparently that wasn't the case, right? And so, when I talk to a therapist, I ask them who their therapist is, and we have that discussion because, they've got to share what's going on with them with somebody else who's prepared to handle that so that they can be, let's just call it cleansed or prepared for the next day. And we have to do that. We as senior leaders have to be able to do that. I have to be able to do that with my CO and my XO so that the three of us can go out there and present, not present faking, but present that united front that says this is an okay place. This is good. And we will do the very best that we can to take care of you. And so bringing it back to the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, if you look at the makeup of our board, I will tell you that everybody that's on our board is phenomenal, and we're all cut from a similar piece of cloth, but we're different. And I have sought counsel from everybody on our board for different things, and I know of their reputation from when they were active duty, or we still have one that's active duty. And there are people out there that are doing the things that need to be done. And we continue to offer, our programs as a supplement, right? We're not the only thing out there, and people have to apply to come.
Yeah, that's great. And again, I have the utmost respect for what you guys are doing with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. I think, it's going to take multiple forefronts to really, really see that change we're looking for from the mental health standpoint, a leadership standpoint, a culture standpoint, generations coming together and understanding where we can take our strengths and use those strengths to collaborate together instead of butting heads and saying, my Navy versus, my Navy. I hate that. Hate it, because you still to this day, you hear the old school people that are like, oh, well, in my Navy, we do this. But it's like, no, I mean, the Navy is meant to evolve. The military in general, and they're trying to evolve, but you can't complete that evolution if everyone isn't on board with collaborating with each other and making things better and giving that positive feedback to make things better. But then also the people that are getting the feedback need to hear the feedback and make implementations. I mean, everyone has to do their part for this to work. And so I'm so appreciative of the role that you guys are playing and the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. I think that is going to make such a difference, even if it is just a handful of people every year compared to the size of the entire DoD organization. I mean, that's going to make that difference. So I'm so appreciative of that. To end this off, Jim, I would just love if you would share three things. We'll say three things that you would recommend to someone who is looking to become a better leader. Where do you suggest that they start?
Wow.
Loaded
Just put me on
question.
the
I know.
spot. I was waiting for like the Desert Island Classic. Like, what album would you take if so oh man. Say that one more time.
Three things for someone who wants to start working on becoming a better leader. So maybe it's an E1, E2. They can't quite get into the foundry yet, but they're like, hey, you know what? I really want to start working on my leadership skills, which I recommend. If you are lower enlisted and you're listening to this podcast and you're not in a position where you can apply to be part of the foundry classes, but you want to start your leadership, I don't think you're ever too low of a rank to start that. So three things. And I mean, they could be anything. I know there's a number of them. So it's hard to narrow down sometimes to say like, hey, where's the best place to start? But three places that you think would be a good place for someone to start if they want to start working on their leadership skills.
All right. So three things. One, I would have a book, a leadership-based book, and actually read it. Like, make a goal to read one leadership book a month, and if that's hard, make, at least 6 a year, right? Just constantly read. One of the things is that I know about, great leaders read, and you might find a book you don't like. You're not obligated to that book. That book doesn't have feelings, right? If that book is trash, don't throw it away. It might not be trash for somebody else. Close it, put it away, get another book. Okay. So read a leadership book at least once a month, or at best one every 2 months. The second thing is supplement that with, there's TED Talks out there. There's free everything online. Okay. It's not a substitute. So hard copy book or an audio book, that's one. Two is find a TED Talk, a leader, a something. People like Simon Sinek, people like David Goggins, people like Brene Brown, people like Dr. G's, the Happy Wizard podcast. Listen to Rachel's podcast, right? Find something that works, leadership based. And the other thing is find something in some way, shape, or form. I don't care how you get there or what it is, that makes you understand that you are the most important person in this whole equation. You, not your partner, not your children, not anybody other than you. Okay. And it's not a selfish thing. It's a take care of yourself thing, because you cannot be there for somebody else if you are not present your own self. I used to tell my sailors, I try and get as close to 100% every day that I can be. Rarely do I operate at 100%, and there's no such thing, in my opinion, as 110%. So read a book constantly. Find a podcast, some sort of medium that's going to help you with leadership, with bettering yourself, with whatever. And the other piece is find a way that you can focus on yourself, whether that's movement, meditation, yoga, playing, I don't care, something that takes care of you. Book, media, you.
Powerful. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. You've put out so much phenomenal information. I'm so excited for this episode to be released and the things that people are going to get from just hearing your wisdom. And is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with today? Any last words?
Take care of yourself, please. And don't be afraid to reach out.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.